The next book is called Muncha Muncha Muncha. This is by Candace Fleming, and the pictures are drawn by G. Brian Carras. He's the illustrator. For years, Mr. McGreely dreamed of planting a garden. He dreamed of getting his hands dirty, of growing yummy vegetables and gobbling them all up. And there he is up in his window, looking down and dreaming. But he never, ever once tried it. This spring, said Mr. McGreely, this spring, by golly, I'm going to plant a garden. And here he is at the gardening store, looking at the tools and seeds and things. So he hoed and he sowed and he watched his garden grow. And look, there's 3 little bunnies. Do you see them? They're watching him. And here he is working in his garden. Lettuce, carrots, peas, and tomatoes. Yummy, yum, yummy. Said Mr. McGreely, I'll soon fill my tummy with crisp, fresh veggies. But one night, when the sun went down and the moon came up, 3 hungry bunnies appeared. Here they are. Boop. Tippy, 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 pat. Muncha, muncha, muncha. They got in the garden and they were eating Mr. McGreely's vegetables. Well, the next morning when Mr. McGreely saw his gnawed sprouts, he was angry. So he built a wire fence all around his vegetable garden. That makes sense. Look at that. That'll keep the bunnies out, right? But look, who's peeking? There, he declared, no bunny can get into my garden now. And then the sun went down and the moon came up and tippy, 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 pat. Spring, hurdle, dash, dash, dash. Muncha, muncha, muncha. They got in again. Those naughty little bunnies. They jumped over his fence. The next morning, when Mr. McGreely saw his nibbled leaves and gnawed sprouts, he was really angry. So he built a tall wooden wall. Look how big that is. Behind the small wire fence, all around his vegetable garden. Huh, he huffed. Those flop ears will never get over it. No bunny can get into my garden now, he said. But look carefully. Look who's peeking. And the sun went down and the moon came up and tippy, 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 pat. Dig, scrabble, scratch, scratch, scratch. Muncha, muncha. Oh, spring hurdle, dash, dash, dash. Muncha, muncha, muncha. They got it again. The next morning, when Mr. McGreely saw his chewed stems and his nibbled leaves and his gnawed sprouts, he was really, really angry. So he made a deep, wet trench outside the tall wooden wall, behind the small wire fence, all around his vegetable garden. Ha! He snorted. Those pufftails can't get under it. They can't get over it. No bunny can get into my garden now. But look who's peeking. Boop. And the sun went down and the moon came up and tippy, tippy, pat. Dive, daddle, splash, splash, splash. Look, they actually are paddling across the moat. Dig, scrabble, scratch, 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 spring, hurdle, dash, dash, dash. Muncha, muncha, muncha. They got in again. Well, the next morning when Mr. McGreely saw his chomped blossoms, his chewed stems, and his nibbled leaves and his gnawed sprouts, he was furious. So he hammered and blocked and sawed and stocked and drilled and filled and trapped and locked, and he built a huge, enormous thing before the deep, wet trench outside the tall wooden wall behind the small wire fence all around his vegetable garden. I've outsmarted those twitch whiskers for sure, he exclaimed. They can't get through it. They can't get under it. They can't get over it. no bunny, no way, no how can get into my vegetable garden now. But look who's peeking. Do you see them? And the sun went down and the moon came up and Tippy, 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 stop. Look, this is a lock. It stopped them. The three hungry bunnies looked and smelled and touched the huge, enormous thing before them. And tippy, 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 pat, the bunnies hopped away. Maybe it worked. The next morning, when Mr. McGreely saw his untouched vegetables, he was happy. And I don't see any bunnies at all. Oh, look. See that? I beat the bunnies, he whooped and did a jiggly wiggly victory dance. And then he climbed over, jumped across, squeezed between, and crawled under until he reached his vegetable garden. Ah, sighed Mr. McGreely. At last, smacking his lips, he picked and pulled up lettuce, carrots, peas, tomatoes, and with his basket overflowing, he reached inside for something yummy. Look carefully at his basket. See if you can see that. Do you see inside his basket? And look here. Here you can see his basket. He doesn't even know it. He reached inside and muncha, muncha, muncha. Look what he found. Well, you've heard the saying, if you can't beat them, join them. And there's Mr. McGreely sharing his carrots with the little bunnies. That is a fun story. Muncha, Muncha, Muncha by Candace Fleming. I love it. I hope you loved it too.